to make sure. Great, thank you. Yeah, so hey, my name's Tom Medema, and I am a co-founder with the Rally for Rangers project, which is a nonprofit that is about 5 years old now, with the express mission of protecting the world's special places one motorcycle at a time. And what we do is we deliver new motorcycles to park rangers around the world through adventure rallies. We recruit riders from all corners of the globe. Everybody buys in, and we donate 10, 15, or 20 bikes a year or more to national parks in places like Mongolia, Argentina, Nepal. This year we're going to Bhutan. And so it's this kind of growing movement of riders who are supporting park rangers around the world by donating motorcycles. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about kind of the whole arc of this thing. But I want to start by showing you our latest film teaser. It's about a 5-minute teaser that kind of is a brief introduction to what we do. And it's something that we've been raising money for. We just finished a Kickstarter campaign to help fund the full documentary. And this will be, you know, kind of a taste of it. And then I'll kind of talk through in slides a little bit more depth about how it works and what we do, and then take some questions obviously as well. So I'm going to try to share my screen here a second and get this thing playing. And if you guys somehow don't end up seeing it or hearing it, somebody can chime in and let me know. I'm going to start this film now to give you the introduction.
Around the globe, endangered species and priceless cultural antiquities are under constant threat from poachers and other criminal activity. Charismatic wildlife such as rhinoceros, elephant, snow leopard, and tiger are at risk, and with them,
turn your volume up, Tom.
Biodiversity on our planet. In the wilderness areas of Mongolia, Nepal, Patagonia, Africa, and other remote corners of the world,
not getting any sound here.
You guys aren't hearing it?
No,
I don't hear anything.
I've got the volume all the way up here. Let me try to unplug my head.
Brian, it's something you have to do on your end.
Actually, I hear him fine.
Okay, some of you are hearing it. Okay.
I'm looking for a setting.
Yeah, you have to set your audio to, I forgot the setting. You have to get
Tom,
it up.
Tom, when it pops up to tell you you're sharing your screen, there should be a checkbox at the bottom that says share computer sound. Did you see that when you shared?
I did not.
Are you on the web app or are you on a desktop application?
I am on, I believe, the desktop application. So some are hearing it and some aren't. Is that right?
Yeah, try to reshare it and see if that little button exists, because she's the wizard for sure.
Yeah. All right. So I just stopped sharing. Let me hit share screen again, and then I select the QuickTime player that I'm using. Share computer sound. That button in the bottom left.
Yep.
Okay.
Let's try that.
Shall I start it over?
Yes, please.
You got it.
Still no sound. Yeah, I still have no sound.
Okay, I paused it. I'm not sure what else to do on this end.
You may have to unplug your earplugs.
Around the globe, endangered
That does it.
That does it.
species are under constant
Third time's a charm.
Around the globe, endangered species and priceless cultural antiquities are under constant threat from poachers and other criminal activity. Charismatic wildlife such as rhinoceros, elephant, snow leopard, and tiger are at risk, and with them, the loss of critical biodiversity on our planet. In the wilderness areas of Mongolia, Nepal, Patagonia, Africa, and other remote corners of the world, park rangers are on the front lines in this ongoing battle.
The mission of Rally for Rangers is to improve the capability of rangers, one bike, one ranger at a time.
So with Rally for Rangers, you raise the cash to buy a motorcycle, and that motorcycle is waiting for you in Mongolia or other countries that we're in, and then you ride it in some really difficult conditions for multiple days. At the end, you hand that bike over to a ranger. It's very personal, and you change that one person's life. People that come to the rally are having a direct impact on protecting these areas. You're doing something great for the environment. I mean, you're using a motorcycle to help protect national parks.
Successfully patrolling vast expanses of often roadless and rugged landscapes over days or weeks requires high quality and durable motorcycles and other outdoor gear.
Our parks are big and people have to move long distances. There are heaps of things happen on a daily basis where the bike does the job better than any other vehicle.
Rally for Rangers is building a community of supporters, combining passion for the protection of our fragile environment with the passion of motorcycle enthusiasts to make a meaningful and sustainable difference.
Rangers, they're normally having to go around by horseback, so giving them a motorcycle just gives them a leg up to help snow leopards and to help all the things that they're trying to accomplish.
It seems like such a small thing to give a motorcycle to the rangers, but then when you learn how much that affects the environment, it's such a cool thing to be part of.
When we can come and have this amazing experience and then give them these reliable bikes so that they can do their job, that's part of the reason that it's such a cool initiative.
Two years ago, 2 of the motorcycles in Mongolia were burned by poachers. That makes you angry, but then you sit back and you say, why did they do that? Because it's working. Because the motorcycles now are a threat to what they're doing.
To hear the stories of the decline in poaching, the decline in illegal mining over the last 6 or 7 years, real tangible results from these guys and gals being able to get out on these bikes and do a lot more. It doesn't get any better, and it's so rewarding for everybody involved. Everybody has a role to play, in this effort.
Coming into view of our rangers here, I think momentarily, waiting for their new bikes.
When we met the rangers and we see how excited they are, it was like Christmas Day or something. It was pretty emotional, quite honestly, to see that. I had tears in my eyes.
It's really about being able to positively impact, someone's life in a really meaningful way on a day-to-day basis through doing something that you love.
It means a lot to them to have these bikes. Their jobs have gotten easier in a lot of ways, and they're doing a lot more to protect the space.
Motorcyclists have an obligation to stand up and, help protect these national parks and these wild places so they can utilize them.
The threats don't have to persist. Species can and are being saved. If each one of us can channel the will and commitment of the ranger, the planet we see and experience will continue to provide for the health and survival of all species.
All right, let me switch out of that and go to my slide deck. So I'm going to talk through a little bit of the history of it, and we'll get to some questions that don't get answered here during the course of this about how it all came to be and how it works and everything. But that's our current effort is we've spent 4 years capturing obviously some dynamic footage and spending time with rangers and following rallies. And the goal is to create a feature film that will really tell this story and help raise more money, more awareness, and find more people to join us on these rides. So a lot of people ask, you know, how did it start? And it started in Mongolia in 2013. You see Lake Baikal on the north, on the top of the photo there in Russia, Lake Baikal, and just to the left of that, you see a large body of water in northern Mongolia, and that's Lake Hovsgol National Park. And Mongolia is really an amazing place if you haven't been. It's one of probably the least densely populated countries in the world. I think the average still is 2 people per square mile in Mongolia. And so most of the countryside is open, nomadic cultures like this, living in what they call gers, G-E-R, what we call yurts, with population densities scattered in a few places throughout the country, but by and large, people spread out over vast distances across the entire country, living the way that they have lived largely for thousands of years, since the days of Genghis Khan and those kind of empire building days. They still live very simply, but of course have some of the modern trappings and conveniences of life that we have. But it's a remarkable place and a remarkable culture that everybody should spend some time in. The national parks they have there are all relatively new, because Mongolia is a new democracy since 1992, when the Soviet Union fell apart and they became their own democracy. So the sheep that they have, the argali, the ibex, the taimen, the largest trout species in the world, and snow leopard, of course, are critically threatened species that some of them exist only in Mongolia, and a lot of them in the national parks that are there. And so how do these new national parks learn how to do their work? Our national park system here started in Yosemite in 1864 with Abraham Lincoln, and then of course Yellowstone in 1872. And so we've got 150 years of history with our national parks, and they've got barely 25 years. So Lake Hovsgol was a park, one of the first there, that the US park system started to help. And it's called the Pearl of Mongolia, the Blue Pearl. It's a sacred lake, as well as the headwaters of Lake Baikal. And it's home to 1% of the world's fresh water. It's an incredible body of water. But with the opening of democracy there and the opening of the borders and tourism, the pressures on this precious resource are increasing all the time. And they don't have the historic knowledge to protect it as a national park. And so you see development and illegal mining and poaching happening, all across the park and all across the country. So some US former park rangers have headed over there to work with this outfit called the Mongol Ecology Center. And Bob McIntosh, in the orange jacket there, is a retired US park ranger. He's on the board of the Mongol Ecology Center, and he started working with those parks to help them learn how to better manage and use best practices in protecting those parks from the threats that we're used to, again, for 150 years, here in the US. And so Bob spent several years, 2011, 2012, 2013, helping to develop plans for the national parks over there alongside their rangers and with their communities to help, teach them how to protect these special places. And he met a number of rangers along the way. And one of the things that struck him was the lack of equipment, the lack of funding, the lack of resources that they had to do their job. And at the same time, this public growth and visitation, things like this where, they don't even have the money to make a sign, right? So the rangers are hand painting, on cardboard, these signs that say don't enter, stay away from the shores of the lake. And you see people ignoring it and driving, their car right down to the shores of the lake. And when Bob was there working with them, there was a day that happened, that Bob was with the chief ranger there with his motorcycle. And that chief ranger had to go deal with one of these issues, and he jumped on this old Chinese motorcycle. And in that moment, that motorcycle, which is similar to the one you see behind this ranger here, just fell apart right there on the road, right in front of Bob McIntosh. The ranger was embarrassed. He wasn't hurt, but the bike literally just disintegrated because it was in such poor condition, just held together with baling wire, and duct tape, so to speak. And McIntosh was so infuriated by the condition of their equipment, and particularly these motorcycles, that 70-year-old Bob McIntosh said to that ranger in that moment, I'm coming back next year and I'm going to bring you a motorcycle myself, a brand new one, and I'm going to give it to you. And he was there with a couple other people, and they started telling that story. Well, guess what? 1 year later, 2014 in July, 15 of us rolled after 8 days of riding across Mongolia at the Lake Hovsgol with 15 new Yamaha AG200s. Well, relatively new. They had, 1,500 kilometers on them by the time we got there. But we handed 15 new motorcycles to 15 park rangers to help them do their job in Lake Hovsgol National Park. This crazy harebrained idea from the side of the road in 2013 became Rally for Rangers in 2014. And 3 of us on that first rally, myself, of course, Bob, whose idea it initially was, and then Wesley Thornberry, whose wife was the founder of the Mongol Ecology Center. We were like, we're onto something here. Like this is something that probably could be sustainable. And so we said, let's do it again next year. Let's go bigger. And so we did. The following year, we went from Lake Hovsgol in the north, which you see circled there, just a little bit west to the Darhad Valley with 20 motorcycles. Yeah.
Are we supposed to be seeing slides?
Yeah, are you not?
No.
You're kidding me. What are you seeing? Just me?
No slides, just you.
But you're a nice face to look at. No.
Yeah, well, thank you for jumping in, because I don't know why the screen sharing stopped. When I stopped the film, I just went to another deck.
I'll say your descriptions were excellent.
I think you're sharing your application, Tom. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, because I didn't do stop share. I just switched over to another screen.
Yeah, it's because you were sharing the application, not your screen.
Man, you missed out on some killer stuff. Look at that.
You were describing it so well.
That's Bob.
Those are some cool slides too.
That's Santa Claus. The rangers he met, the shores of the lake, the cars driving down to the edge, the motorcycle I was referring to, and all the new bikes that we brought in 2014. And I'm so glad you jumped in. And there's the 3 of us, myself, Wesley, and Bob, as I was just referring to. And there again on the north shore on the northern side of Mongolia is Lake Hovsgol that I've been talking about in hopefully descriptive enough terms, where that first rally went. So you can see Ulaanbaatar kind of a little bit further down to the right with the yellow square. And then we went up to Lake Hovsgol the first year. And the second year, we followed the red line, that route, with 20 motorcycles to 3 national parks just west of Lake Hovsgol. And we learned very quickly that 20 was too many to keep track of, too many to get strung out in remote areas. It was a really challenging ride, and the weather on that ride was abysmal. And we actually ended up being stranded for 2.5 days on a patch of ground as big as a football field with rivers like this on all sides of us. And we were up in a high elevation pass and we had no way to get out. And so we waited for a number of rangers to come from a few parks to help us get across the river when the water started to recede. So one of the things we learned early on is that you've got to be ready for anything because you never know how you're going to get from one place to the next, where you're going to lose a day or 2 days. That's the nature of adventure riding in remote places, as some of you may know. So we did deliver 20 bikes that year, but we also realized 20 is way too many. So we decided to take a year off and kind of think about what we were doing. So we didn't do any rallies in 2016, but thought ahead to 2017 when we wanted to go to the Gobi Desert and chose the sacred mountain of Enkhtaivan. So here again on the right-hand side, you see Ulaanbaatar, the capital city. And you can see we went the opposite direction to the south, down through the Gobi Desert and back up around to Enkhtaivan, which is an incredible and sacred peak in the center of Mongolia. It's one of the most sacred places in the entire country. And also home to some incredible resources like the snow leopard, where they need bikes to help protect. So we had an incredible ride through the Gobi, and that's a whole nother, again, if you guys like what you're seeing, I can do an individual slideshow on each one of these rallies because it's just too much to contain. This is the Flaming Cliffs you may have heard of, and this is where some of the very first dinosaur eggs were discovered. We went through the Singing Sand Dunes and some of these other remarkable places along the Silk Road in the Gobi Desert on our way up to Enkhtaivan to deliver just 10 motorcycles. So we actually went the other way in 2017. We really liked 10. That was a nice number, easy to keep track of, easy to have a similar caliber of rider with 10 as opposed to 20. But that was a pretty remarkable trip that year. But we thought maybe we'll try 15. Let's go back to that number that we started with. And that's what we've done ever since. And so 2018, we go all the way out to the western edge of Mongolia, the very western edge. You can see in the white circle out there. And this is my GPS track from that ride. And you can see where we've gone. We started and then went south. We started where the red squares are and went south, right up to the Chinese border. And then we hugged the Chinese border at a high elevation all the way up to the Altai Mountains. And you can see Kazakhstan starting to stick in from the left-hand side there, and then Russia up above. So right where all those three countries come together is the Altai mountain range. And it is stunning. Incredibly different from the rest of Mongolia. Obviously nothing like the Gobi Desert, completely different than the vast open steppe lands, different than the North Country. Just an incredible landscape to ride and some incredible resources along the way as well as we traveled through the Altai. Certainly the natural resources like we've been talking about, but the cultural resources in this region are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And that's because there's 40,000 years of continuous human history captured in stone in this region. Some of it is in ancient etchings like these that you see here. Some of it is in cave paintings. But poachers even come for these. They come and they chisel them out and they take them and they sell them on the black market. And of course, people hang them, you know, in their rooms and you know, things like that. So even these cultural antiquities are under threat and have to be constantly protected, you know, by the park rangers. I'm just going to highlight one brief story from each of these rallies because there's too much, but this was an evening when we got separated from our gear. In Mongolia, it's a spider web of roads. It's almost impossible to navigate, even for people who know the country, because the roads are single track, two track, there's no pavement. And so if you make one wrong turn, you know, you have to leave a person on every corner at every turn, because if you don't and you're spread out, that person doesn't know which of these 8 tracks to take. Well, there was a day that the final rider, the tail rider, didn't wait for the chase vehicles. And so the motorcycles went one way and the chase vehicles went another way. And they were hours away and 2 valleys away at dinner time and bedtime. So we had nothing. And there was this solitary gear, this Kazakh family and their solitary gear up on the mountainside. And so all 15 motorcycles go rolling up in the middle of the night to this gear. Well, what do? They welcome us in. They put out every bit of food they have. And they say, we'll move outside. You guys go ahead, take the floor. You all can sleep in here. That's Mongolia. That's the people of Mongolia. You run into those stories again and again and again. And fortunately, our gear did arrive about 5 hours late, but we finally had dinner about midnight, got our tents laid out, and finally went to sleep and gave these people their home back. But I love that story because it's exactly what Mongolia is all about. And then lastly, this last August, we brought 15 motorcycles to that lake in the circle over in the Hovd province, again, back towards the west. We actually flew to our starting point this year as well in Murin and rode down that northern route that you can see in the black dotted line there to Karuz National Park and donated 15 bikes there. It's home of one of the most endangered antelope species anywhere in the world. Really, really small, really hard to see and hard to find. You need a wildlife lens, a telephoto to even capture them. But critically endangered because all of that grassland that you're seeing is being destroyed by cashmere goats. Mm-hmm. Cashmere is a cash crop in Mongolia, one of the few cash crops they have. And so people are trading out their traditional herding ways for goats. And as you know, if you know goats, they eat anything and everything and decimate the countryside. So some of the wildlife populations there that are grazers are being impacted. And so the rangers have to try to patrol the park boundaries to keep the grazing animals out so that the wildlife can exist within these park boundaries. And again, we dealt with this in Yosemite National Park. The Buffalo Soldiers in 1890 were chasing herders out of Yosemite National Park in the US. So the same problem, you know, 100 years later. It's been kind of fascinating to watch. Our favorite story from this rally is the ferry to nowhere. Of course, in Mongolia, there's very few bridges. Most of the time, like you saw before, you have to carry or push your bike or ride your bike through the water. But in some places, it's too deep. And so there might be a ferry. And so we had arranged with this ferry boat captain to meet us and take us across, and he wasn't there. And so we're like, well, how long do we wait? So we waited an hour or two, and he never showed. And we're like, well, how hard can it be? We'll take the ferry across. Well, we got the ferry loaded with half the bikes. And again, you have to take, you know, 6 bikes or 8 bikes at a time. It's going to take a long time. But we got halfway across, and we realized that the ferry was locked with a cable underneath the water, and we could only get halfway. So we sat there trying to figure out why we couldn't move any further for a while, and people just thought it was because of navigation skills, but turns out we were locked in place. So they had to come back. We spent a couple hours trying to pick the lock, finally realized we were stuck, and so we set up camp and waited. And the ferry captain had the wrong day. He showed up the next day. So there again, just like 2015, we lost an entire day because somebody didn't show up to take us on the ferry across the trail or across the river. And that's what we tell our riders: flexibility, adaptability. Every day something will go wrong, and that's just the way it is. And that's part of the adventure, and those are the things you end up talking about when you get home. So after those successes in Mongolia, we thought this is something we can export. We can do this in other places. And we thought, where do we go? Where do we want to go? Where do they need us? And one of the first places we reached out to was Patagonia, because number one, that's where the riders wanted to go. But I had also been to Chile, and I knew that they used motorcycles and didn't have the resources, that they needed. So we reached out to Chile, and they were in the middle of a presidential election and just a messy political time, and they just couldn't help us. So we checked with Argentina, and they were like, yes, please bring them down. So we did it. We brought 15 riders down to Rio Gallegos, Argentina, and then went down through Tierra del Fuego to Ushuaia and back up to El Calafate National Park to help with all the different species that they protect across Patagonia and Argentina, in particular forest fire patrol, because if you're not familiar with Patagonia, fire does not exist naturally in Patagonia. Lightning strikes there don't hit the ground. They go cloud to cloud. And so the species down there are not fire resilient, unlike in most places up in this hemisphere, the northern hemisphere, where lightning causes many fires. Down there, the only fires are the ones caused by humans. And the wildlife and the plants are not adapted to a fire environment. So they have to catch the fires immediately. So it's a huge thing there that maybe not quite as important elsewhere, just because of the nature of the environment. So down there, we didn't have Yamahas. They were too expensive, and so we got a Beta. And I didn't mention that earlier, but we'll talk about the Yamaha AG200. That's the bike we use in Asia as much as we can, and particularly Mongolia. But the Beta TR200, was the bike that did the job just fine. And everywhere we go, the bikes, we buy them locally because we want to support the local economy. We want a bike that can be fixed locally, that the rangers know how to work on, and that parts are available for. So in this case, we went with Beta Argentina, and they're a bike that is manufactured in Argentina and branded by Beta. And so it was a good tool for them, inexpensive to maintain, relatively reliable, although not as reliable as most of the Japanese bikes, but also not necessarily the perfect instrument for 50-mile-an-hour winds 24 hours a day throughout Patagonia, and a very different ride, right? Not trails, not two tracks, not single track. This was pavement, it was Ripio, gravel, a much different type of ride heading down to Ushuaia. We did find a little bit of challenging, trail along the way. And this was a choice. Just to the right is a beautiful paved road, but we wanted to get these things off road and test them out a little bit. So we did that on our way down to Ushuaia, which is a destination, of course, for many world traveling motorcyclists. It's just one of those places on the southern tip of the continent that is so compelling, beautiful and amazing, and has its own national parks, Tierra del Fuego National Park, which is where some of the motorcycles would go at the end of this rally. And of course, riding a motorcycle to the end of the earth there is on a lot of people's bucket list. Unlike camping, unlike finding yourself in the random yurt of a strange Kazakh Mongolian, the accommodations were much different in Argentina. The food, the wine was much different in Argentina. It was really a completely different rally, different ferries in Argentina than what we're used to, but still just a delight every single day. And if you don't spend much time riding on the beach, I want to caution you that fish nets can be an absolute disaster. And you can lose time because of rainstorms. You can lose time because the ferry captain doesn't show up. And you can lose time because one of your boneheaded compatriots doesn't see a fish net and wraps it in the rear axle that takes about 2 hours to remove, as well as negotiating with the owner of the fish net to pay them back for damaging their fish net, which is something we never want to do. But again, one of those highlights that people talk about in this particular rally. And that's a very genuine look of despair on the rider's face, for sure.
Wow.
Southern Argentina, southern Chile are stunning. If you haven't been there, they're just nothing like it. This is Torres del Paine National Park in Chile. I've had the good fortune to be there twice, once on a motorcycle and actually once for my day job with the Park Service. But a mountain range unparalleled anywhere in the world. But our destination was El Calafate, Los Glaciares National Park in Argentina. So just on the other side of that ice field on the horizon is Torres del Paine, Chile. They come together at the top of that ice field. But this was our destination, was at Los Glaciares, and that's where we did the donation ceremony. When I was speaking at the donation ceremony, there were actually calving glaciers behind me, spalling, you know, massive amounts of ice into the water, just rumbling and crashing. And you're trying to, you know, do this this ceremony with this, you know, orchestra of sound behind you. It was something I'll never forget. And a very different use of the motorcycles, as I mentioned, in Mongolia. It's one motorcycle and one ranger, and they take that bike and it's theirs, just like a horse. They care for it, they feed it, they fuel it, they maintain it, and they patrol on it. Most places, like the US, have a motor pool, and you have any number of vehicles that any number of rangers can use on a given day. And that's what's happening with these bikes. These bikes will actually be spread around to different parks in Argentina, used by different people as part of a motor pool in that park. So it's a different model depending on what they need, you know, wherever we go. And then lastly, most recently, Nepal. And I know I want to mind our time here. We're at almost 7:45, so I'll go through this rather briskly. This was just in November. We learned that the World Ranger Congress, a triennial convention of national park organizations from around the world gathering in Nepal, was the perfect place for us to deliver motorcycles, because not only could we bring bikes to the Nepalese rangers, but rangers from 70 other countries would be there and see what we were doing, and they would raise their hand and they would say, hey, we want to do this, how can we get involved? And that's exactly what happened. But first, I thought that Mongolia was the hardest riding I'd ever done and would ever do, until I rode in Nepal, until I tried to take a Yamaha XTZ 125 carbureted bike up to 15,000 feet. It was incredible. And the wildlife that we were going there to protect include the very endangered one-horned rhino, of course, the Bengal tiger on the border with India there, and trying to get rangers off of elephants. Riding elephants is something that no one should do. And I can tell you that's a whole nother thing you can research on your own, but getting rangers on motorcycles instead of elephants would be a treat. And also off of rickety old bicycles and onto motorcycles to help them do their job and patrol better. Another one of our goals. So 15 Yamaha XTZ 125s that we purchased in Kathmandu. Some of you probably have ridden the streets of Asia. This was my first time literally on the streets, and it was chaos like I've never seen before. You get used to it relatively quickly, as long as you just kind of like, you know, get that eat or be eaten mentality. You just ride through it. But this close calls like this one, that kind of tight quarters, close call, in some cases the bike is actually in between the two vehicles as they're passing each other, is just constant. Just no matter where you are in the country, the riding is incredibly challenging, even if the roads are good, because the traffic is so gnarly. But as we climbed up out of Kathmandu and to the north, up into the Himalayas and up towards Jamsum, the scenery changed dramatically. The roads, as you can see, changed dramatically. And for the first time, I rode with exposure. That was a new thing for me. I had ridden lots of challenging off-road terrain over the last few years, but never anything with the extreme exposure.
Wow.
Of 2,000 feet above, you know, a valley floor on a trekking bridge, on a roadside that's just wide enough for two motorcycles, you know, while you're waiting one at a time to get through a particularly tricky spot, and then a truck or a bus comes the other way. And you definitely want to get slope side and not on the downhill side because of the fear of getting knocked off. It's just not something I'd ever been through or experienced before. And then climbing, as I mentioned, on an XTZ 125 at 13, 14, 15,000 feet, if you have any sort of mass, it's not going to work. And you can see dead in the middle of the photo, that's the lead rider with the red helmet on walking down, because he knows the next person's probably going to bog out and have to be pushed. So not only do you have to push the bike uphill, but you're at again, 14,000 feet of elevation. So there's just nothing to breathe up there. And it was just again and again. And we knew this ahead of time. They told us, but you're like, oh, you know, I'll just throttle it a little bit, tease the throttle, and I'll just walk uphill with it. Well, none of us trained to do that at 14,000 feet. And so we got into situations, you know, like this. Where there's 6 inches of silt. It's freezing cold. And we're pushing bikes uphill, and we all end up looking like this. You could not get your helmet off fast enough because you were convinced the helmet was restricting your breathing. And so you're just sucking air and trying to breathe before getting back on the bike. And it happened again and again. It was just one of those things that, again, we didn't have to do it because the motorcycles were being delivered in the south, in the jungle. But it was one of the places we wanted to visit, the parks in the north. And so we just went ahead. And again, one of those things that everybody still talks about. And then you'll run into something like this, where you see that track laying in front of the backhoe there. Well, that backhoe is taking up the entire road. So we have to carry all the bikes across that backhoe to get to the other side. But how are the support vehicles going to go? They can't. They have to turn around, and they have to find another route or wait until this thing is fixed, however many days from now, and then come through. So once again, adaptability, flexibility, we preach it over and over. And then think about those conditions and think about nightfall. We don't ever want to ride at night. We ride in conditions that are far too dangerous. The days are far too long, that after 10 hours of riding off-road in a foreign country with exposure and rocks and everything else, you do not want to have to add darkness. And so that only happens, obviously, when those delays happen, with those unexpected delays. And in this particular case, unfortunately, our last climb up into Lo Man Thang, which was our turnaround point, we hit darkness. And unfortunately, one of our riders nearly had a head-on collision with a Nepalese rider who was coming at him with no headlight. And so he went down, our guy went down, he ditched to avoid, broke his hand, and that was it for him. He wasn't able to finish the trip. We had to put one of the support team on his bike, and he was in reasonably good spirits, but you're there to ride and deliver a motorcycle. And he's not the first. We've broken a handful of bones on different rallies, and that's just the nature of riding in some of these conditions. But this was really unfortunate for him particularly, but again, just the way that it all worked out. But Nepal is an incredible country. I did not know Nepal had all these cliff dwellings historically, like some of the things we have here in the United States. Again, Lo Man Thang was our turnaround point. This ancient walled city that dates back to the 1300s is an incredible spot to visit. And the cows live indoors on the first floor, and their heat warms the second floor and the third floor. And then we did take a trip up to the Tibetan border at 15,000 feet with China there, the Nepal border with China, which is the Tibetan Plateau. And you can see this massive structure that the Chinese have built that is absolutely unoccupied and is only there as a show of strength. There's not a soul to be seen anywhere around. And there's another one just like it out of the screen to the left. So that was as far as we went on our turnaround point before we unfortunately hit snow heading back out. And so here again, darkness, think about doing all of those same things in snow. Not in the plan, wasn't supposed to snow, driest month of the year, but you're in the Himalayas. So that's what we hit on our way back down. And finally, of course, got out of it safely, got back down to our destination where there happened to be every 2 nights at 6:30, a wild one-horned rhinoceros walking right through the middle of town to some feeding grounds. That was another thing that wasn't expected. And we finished at the World Ranger Congress, donated 15 motorcycles in front of 500 people from 70 countries. And we got people lined up for where we're going to go next. We have interest from Mozambique, from Peru, from Bhutan, from Cambodia, from El Salvador, and the list goes on and on. And so we've got a program, you know, heading forward 5 years off into the future to bring these park rangers new bikes, to help protect the species that they're protecting and that we're helping them protect, the cultural antiquities that they have to protect. And we're going to bring as many bikes as we can to as many park rangers anywhere in the world that need them. That's what Rally for Rangers is all about. And so we recruit people like you, your friends, your family, whoever. We do fundraising all the time to help, you know, execute these rallies. working on the documentary film. We're planning this year, depending on what happens with COVID. We have a rally in Mongolia in September. We have a rally in Bhutan, which is really remarkable and unusual, in November. And then 1 year from now, we're planning Peru, Mozambique in June of 21, and who knows from there. So that's Rally for Rangers. That's what we do, and that's why we do it. And so I'll stop talking and field any questions or clarifications that you might have. And I really appreciate, you know, you guys being here with me for sure.
Wow.
Well done. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah. How expensive are the motorcycles?
So the motorcycles range in price depending on where you are. Each rally right now, the going rate currently is $10,750. That's your buy-in. Half of that pays for a new motorcycle. Half of it pays for all of your in-country costs. So, and all of it's tax deductible if people are donating to the cause. That's the other thing that works for us, is that much like somebody who's raising money to ride a bicycle for cancer or something else, right? People get donors. And so because we're a 501c3, people don't have to pay out of pocket. People do GoFundMe and all these things for that. So the AG200 is our bike of choice. We love that bike. It is a workhorse farm bike, ag bike. It is a 200cc bike with a fully enclosed self-lubricating chain, tons of rack space, low torque, just an ideal bomber, go anywhere, do anything motorcycle that's fast enough to outpace all the Chinese and Russian bikes they're using, but still be reliable and readily fixable. And so those are, you know, in the $5,000 range for them. And then we try to bring some spare parts and things with us every year as well.
Wow.
That's a good lead in, Tom. Do you guys do any kind of training with the Rangers when you drop the bikes off as far as basic maintenance and break fix?
Yeah, we sure do. We always have a Yamaha, well, with Yamaha, we have a Yamaha mechanic with us. And so they go around the bike because they haven't seen these before most of the time, the AGs, though they live out in, you know, often in the middle of nowhere. And so, but they're familiar with bikes. So the mechanic does a once around. We always do the first oil change as well, of course, en route. And so they do a full once over. And then we do some riding training where needed. You know, remember, most of them are riding bikes all the time. One thing they don't do is ride standing up. And because they go so slow that they just plod along. And you've seen these in other countries where people are riding 4 up, right? Dad's in the front, mom's in the back, and there's 2 kids in the middle and maybe a goat strapped in between. And they're just going about 10 kilometers an hour. And that's how the Rangers are used to patrolling. But if they want to get further faster, if they want to chase poachers, they've got to be able to stand and ride, you know, in a proper off-road fashion. So we do some training around that and try to coach them up with riding as well as bike maintenance.
So what's the assumption that you drop off the bike and then you fly home, or how do you get, once you've dropped off the bike, how do you get home?
Yeah, there's lots of stories about that too. Man, this year we were really lucky because we dropped off the bikes about 20 minutes from the airport. That's the only time that's happened. Most of the time we're 2 days from the nearest airport. And so we have to load into the support vehicles. One time we rented a bus and we rode in the bus on the same roads that we had taken out there. And some of us took to tying our head to the headrest with a shirt. So that we weren't just banging, you know, our heads the whole time. And then you look next to you and there's one of the Mongolians just fast asleep. It's just what they do. So you spend days just, you know, in these Russian vans and in these other support vehicles, just falling on the floor, bouncing off the ceiling. It's one of the adventures of the trip, but it is miserable in the moment.
Where do they see most of their donations come from?
Where do most of your donations come from?
They come from all over, literally. I mean, there are some people who obviously can just write a check. That's just, you know, people who do adventure riding, many have the means, but most of our riders don't have the means. And we want it to be accessible to everyone. That's why we love this model. And we also know that fundraising grows our network. Everybody who asks somebody else for money tells them why, right? And so it just continues to grow what we're doing. So it literally comes, most of the money comes individually, one check at a time. Sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 100, sometimes it's 1,000. I personally have a donor who gave me 500 the first year, and I timidly went back to him the second year, and he gave me 1,000. And then I didn't have to ask anymore. Then he gave me 1,500. And then one year I got stock options. Not me, but I mean the Mongol Ecology Center. So he keeps doubling down because he loves what we're doing and keeps seeing the impact, and he feels like he's helping give that motorcycle away. So it literally comes in from fundraising events. So I will go around for riders that are in the local area. Like there's a young woman right now who's joining us this year in Charlottesville. And so again, when COVID is lifted, I will go do an event and I'll do this slideshow live for her. And then she can pass the hat. Sometimes you can get donations from a local motorcycle shop, and we'll do raffles and auctions and things like that. Like there's any means necessary to raise the money, and each person kind of has their own style and their own approach.
Right. Great presentation.
Thank you.
What is the age range of your 15 riders?
So the youngest is this young woman in Charlottesville. She will be the youngest. She is a senior at Virginia. She's 21 years old, and we thought long and hard. She actually applied last year, and we had to say, you know, we got to set the age limit somewhere. And some people said, you know, the age limit to rent a car is 25. And, you know, we had a debate with our board members, and we decided on 21. You've got to be drinking age because, man, in Mongolia, the vodka is everywhere. And so we figured 21. So she'll be our youngest. This year, thank God, in Nepal, we had 2 guys who were 25 and fit as can be, because they were picking up all the other people's bikes and walking them uphill so people could walk, but didn't have to push. And then the oldest, I mean, you saw Candace in the film who spoke briefly. Candace is in her 60s. We've had at least 2 70-year-olds.
Wow.
You know, again, just talented, quality riders from all over the world. Candace was amazing because she's a former enduro racer, and her husband is a stunt man in Hollywood. He actually stunt doubled on motorcycle for Tom Cruise. So they're like this amazing riding couple. So it is literally the gamut. I would say that the absolute block of age is 40 to 60 for sure. That's the vast majority fall within that. Some in their 20s and 30s, and just a couple older than that.
Hey, 60s is the new teenage years. Just saying.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Hey, what was the brand of the motorcycle that you were touting?
So the Yamaha is what we've given in Asia. There's the AG200.
AG200?
Yes, they're ubiquitous in Africa, Australia, and Asia. You can't get them in South America. You can't get them in the U.S., North America, South America. So that's why we went with the Beta.
What's the closest thing you can get them and get here?
Here would be that Yamaha, the TW, that Yamaha that has the fat tires. Is that
Yamaha
right?
TW?
Do I have that right? The TW, I think it is. That would be the closest.
The TW200, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
TW2R?
Tom, is Yamaha working with you guys to get you good deals on the bikes?
Nope.
That's unfortunate.
It's a shocker to this day. I've approached them every way I know how, asked them to sponsor the film. I even pitched the idea of blue is the new green. You know, you would think that a motorcycle company with the quality that we have of capture, right? Our imagery, the marketing and the story, and what we could give it to them for versus what they would have to pay to like do it themselves. It's continually stunning that nobody at Yamaha has been able to see kind of the light of day on this. And so we hope that it'll happen at some point, but man, there's a lot of potential.
Do you think you could start with a local dealership who might be able to do some kind of a local sponsorship, and could they ship motorcycles, you know, on their behalf to somewhere else?
Yes, then that's been the big problem too. Like I went to AMA. AMA offered me a meeting in Ohio, and so I went there and showed them a slideshow, and they were like, "Man, that's awesome, but you know, you're donating the bikes overseas, and we're really just U.S. based, and it just doesn't make sense for us." And so AMA wasn't interested. And I think Yamaha USA is the same way. They're like, Yamaha Japan might want to get on board, but for us, it just doesn't make sense because we don't want to ship the bikes. We want to buy them local. We want to support the local economy.
Support the local economy, yeah.
But I would love a local Yamaha dealer to donate one bike, and then I can take that to shows. And again, with this collaborate, there's got to be a way that we can co-brand, you know, in a way that costs them almost nothing. But brings a lot of visibility. I just haven't found the right, you know, the local Yamaha dealer in Frederick here is tiny, and just no interest. And yeah, so I just haven't gotten there. So I'm always open for those ideas out there too.
So I hopped on Jeremy McGrath's page He's a rider from Michigan that did Supercross, a motocross friend of ours. And I gave him a link to your stuff. So while we were talking, I did that. I was paying attention somewhat. I did that, and then I also hopped on Dieter's page, you guys, the one who talked to us, who's doing the Fellows Ride. I think he's down in South America now. So we can, from our standpoint, we can definitely, we can propagate you guys throughout social media based on, who we know. And I think Jerry is obviously very involved as the president this year of the International Fellowship of Motorcycling Rotarians. So he's got even a larger push than we do as our small group. But yeah, I mean, for the group, if there's anybody that knows somebody who owns a local dealership, or who's got with a local dealership, that would be cool to address and maybe make a virtual introduction to Tom.
Hey, just an update on Dieter. He just posted a picture today with the last ticket in hand flying to Germany. So he's probably on a plane right now.
Well, I told him that this is maybe his next adventure.
Yeah, we all got to get through this first. I'm just thankful that our Kickstarter campaign for the film started, in early February, and we were able to reach our goal last week before all this really got sideways. So I feel thankful we were able to raise $28,000 towards the film, which is a good start.
Well, the good news is if you don't mind buying a ticket, plane tickets are super cheap right now.
Right.
Actually, the ticket to Mongolia is not too bad. I looked it up while you were doing your presentation. Round trip Delta tied into Korean Air is about $1,600 from Detroit to Mongolia.
I bought a ticket to Denver for $80.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah. And I have a whole year with no charge to, I can't get rid of it, but I could reschedule it for no charge.
Yeah, I've gotten to Mongolia for as little as $900.
Wow, nice.
That's going through China.
It's amazing what the airlines are offering right now.
China's not your first choice. You'd rather go through Korea, but yeah.
I got Jonathan home last week from New Zealand on 2 days' notice for $840, and I flew him specifically from direct to Honolulu, direct to Dulles in Washington, D.C. That's usually like a $6,000 flight. So yeah, I definitely recommend, if you've got any potential flights coming up, to book them now.
Yeah, if you have something you have to do, or you're going to have to do anyways, book it now.
Hey, speaking of that, Amanda, did you get your tickets changed yet for Guatemala?
I knew you were coming to that. I'm wondering if I should change it or if I should just buy a new ticket. I'm going to look at how much a new ticket is, see if it's cheaper, and I might just buy it outright. But I'll get that taken care of before the end of the weekend.
New news. Gabby just contacted me. Her parents are going to let her come from Peru.
Oh my God, that makes me so outrageous.
I got to work out the details yet and get the the legal documents taken care of. But it's cool. Yeah, that just happened last night.
That just made my whole night, Jerry. Thank you.
Yeah.
Tom, Gabby is a 16, 17-year-old exchange student. She was an inbound to Michigan with the Rotary Club this year from Peru, and she was going to go with us on a trip to Guatemala to do a clinic, and she had to go back home because of the.
But she's not back home yet.
Just kidding. She didn't. But we had to cancel it. We had to postpone the trip till August. So it looks like her parents are going to let her come back. Is she done with school down in Peru, Jerry?
I have no idea. I doubt it. Given the age, I doubt it. She's only 16. But about half the kids have gone back to their homes now. I don't think she's due to go back till June. But she's going to go back and then August come join us is what the plan is right now.
That seriously made my whole day. Sorry, Tom. I mean, you're cool too, but.
hey, Tom, I really enjoyed your presentation. I got to scoot. I really enjoyed it. That was awesome. Thank you very much.
That was amazing.
We definitely have to close up. I've got a patient I've got to go see. Scott, would you mind giving us the 4-way test?
You talking
Scott
to me?
Till.
No audio.
John can do it.
Yeah,
is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned?
And will it be fun?
Will it be fun?
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
That was awesome, Tom. Thank you.
Great program.
And Shirley, thanks for joining us.
Stay healthy.
And the guy with the iPhone.
That's Jim.
With the iPhone.
He's muted. He cannot hear.
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute him.
Who is it?
You're muted, Jim. Yeah.
Jim, can you give us your name and unmute yourself and tell us who you are?
Tom, maybe you too.
You're still muted, Jim.
You're still muted.
Yeah.
Can you unmute him, Brett? Oh, there you go.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I apologize. I thought I had it off.
No,
Thank you guys for having me. It was great. I'd love to have you come down and speak at the Rotary Club in Alexandria.
We'd love to have somebody come. What's your last name, Jim? You're from Alexandria?
Yeah, Rotary Club of Alexandria, and my last name is Carmalt, C-A-R-M-A-L-T.
Great. That's perfect. Just for our secretary. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Jim.
Yep, Brian, I have Jim and Shirley's contact information. His wife Shirley and I work together.
Okay. All right.
Very good. Thanks for having us. I appreciate it.
Thanks again for joining, Jim. I appreciate it.
You bet. We'll talk soon, okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Cheers.
All right, guys. Have a good night.
Be safe.
Great job, Tom. Thank you.
Wash your hands. Wash your hands. See you guys next week.
Keep your hands washed.